So in this video, I'm going to talk about layered settings. Now, this is easier to explain via the documentation because they've got some good diagrams. I will show this in Rider as well. So if you go to the documentation page and streamline your work with JetBrains Rider and Rider settings, this talks about two types of mechanism to store the settings. One is directory-based and one is layered settings. If we go to directory-based, I'll talk more about this in a sec. So directory-based is more for the front-end features, and they are saved in XML files in these places. Some of these settings are stored in your user profile directory, and some are installed in the .idea folder in your solution. But in this video, I want to focus on the layer-based settings. And we can see, like we've got this screenshot here, but if I go over to Rider, so this is the solution from the last video, but if I go to the settings, we can see in the settings window, along the side, we've got these icons, and that means these settings can be shared as layers. And this icon is for the directory-based settings that we saw before, but we're going to focus on the layered ones because this is a bit more interesting. Down here, we've got this Manage Layers button. If we click on this, we can choose these different layered options. So we've got Solution, and that's my solution name, Personal. So in fact, let me just drag this across a bit. And that stores it in a file in my solution directory called sln.settings.user. Now you want that in your git ignore, so that's not source control, that's your personal settings for this solution. You've also got the team shared, which does the same thing, but it's in a file that doesn't have user on the end, and that should be source controlled, so that you can share the solution settings with the team. Or you can save the setting just for your own computer, so that's personal. In here, we can actually add more layers. So if you want to, you can add more custom layers, including from a URL. I've personally never had to do this. I think these default layers works well for most scenarios. And it's worth pointing out that these layered settings are compatible with ReSharp as well for Visual Studio. If I go back to the documentation and scroll down a bit, then we've got some diagrams here. So it kind of gives you an idea of this layered kind of concept, where you've got like the default settings, you've got this computer, you've got the team shared ones. So do you remember that will be a file that's source controlled? And then that's also in your solution directory, which isn't source controlled. That will be in your git ignore, but it overlays these settings on top of each other. So notice that the solution personal overrides, if you specify a particular setting, the team shared one. If we go down to some other diagrams, we can see more examples. So you can see where, because the solution personal didn't specify this setting, the result is the one below it. This setting, because the solution personal, which is the top one, did specify it, that's overridden it and it's using that setting as the result. That's what we've ended up with. If we go down a bit more, there's another example. So because the team shared, which is source controlled, has overridden our global setting on this computer, then the team shared one is the one that has won out. And it's worth pointing out that if you've got any settings in your editor config file, that will override any of these. So going back to Rider, if we go back to those settings and we find a setting that has the layered, then you can see those settings, the save button has this drop down. So anything with this layered icon here has this drop down, and I can choose whether it's this computer, personal or team shared. If you're not bothered about explicitly choosing a layer, then you can click save. And also any settings that don't have this layer icon, that just gets saved in your default user profile. If you're working with a team and there's common settings that you use, I would recommend using the layered settings and using this team shared, because that means that those settings are source controlled and you've got the Git history of those changes over time. And that kind of almost acts like a decision record in a way. So just a quick one this time, and this is if you're a Windows developer. I want to show that this also supports older technologies as well, like for example, WinForms. If you've been a .NET developer for a while, then you've probably used WinForms. It's basically an older desktop application technology, and the UI is not the prettiest, but it's great for knocking up internal tools and things. And I just want to show that if I create a WinForms app now, then Rider does provide the things you would see in Visual Studio, like the designer. In fact, I've got a build. So we've got this designer UI. There's the designer toolbox, which is this on the right. So I can copy things like a button and move that around. I can double click and get the event handler just like you would in Visual Studio. And you've got the usual properties list like you would in Visual Studio. So Rider isn't just for new technologies like Web API or Blazor or that kind of thing. Rider does support all the desktop technologies like WinForms. Obviously, WinForms is Windows only. So in this video, we're going to talk about Hot Reload, which allows you to, as you're coding, to have your website or Xamarin Stroke Maui app, it's now called Maui, automatically refresh as you're writing your code. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a Blazor application. I'm going to make it Blazor WASM. So changing the interactive render mode to WebAssembly. I'm going to make it WebAssembly for the entire application. And then let's say create. If I go to the client application and pages and open home, and then we run our application. So we'll run it via the main app. Then that's now launched our Blazor application. So let's move that to the right and have Rider to the left. So let's just get rid of that. So this is running, not debugging. And for running, it requires .NET 6 above. And for debugging, it requires .NET 8 above. Now what happens here is if I say welcome to Dome Train, let's do that. Now, even if I save it at this point, it's not going to update. And we've got apply changes, which if I do shift and type apply changes, I can see that's Alt F10. So instead of clicking and reaching for my mouse, I'm going to do Alt and F10. And we can see that's now applied it. So I can make changes and do Alt and F10. There's also, if I make some more changes and go to configure in settings, there's a few options here. So I can enable it when debugging. I can enable it when running, which is what we're doing at the moment. When debugging, I can say automatically apply the changes on step and resume. But to be honest, what I want is I want when I save it to automatically apply them. And it doesn't seem to support that. So I've got to manually go apply changes. So what I prefer to do is use .NET Watch instead. So let's stop this. And if I open up a terminal, so remember Control Alt 1, there's a better option than this. I'm just going to show you .NET Watch initially. And then if I do, oh, that's the new terminal, which I don't like. Let's right click and say, don't use new terminal. And then if I go to the Blazor app and go to the non-client project and then do .NET Watch, then we can see it says Hot Reload enabled. This has popped up. And if I get rid of this at the end, if you watch the right-hand side, as soon as I do that and save, this at the bottom is going to say it's updated, and then it's going to remove it from here. And you saw a tick then. If you don't want to open up a terminal to do that though, what you can do is when we go to our edit configurations for running, the run debug configurations, then you can click plus and you've got this .NET Watch. Now this used to be a plugin, but now it's built in. By clicking this, you can create a new profile, a new configuration. I'll change this to the main app, not the client, because it needs this to host it. And then let's just do that. Okay. So if I just run this, then that's now launched up. If I make a change and then save, that's now updated immediately. So from my experience, that's the best option so far. I personally wish the out-of-the-box hot reload that we saw in Rider had an option, if we go to the settings again, had an option to automatically apply the changes as soon as you save. And just like that, we've reached the end of this this Rider journey. We've covered a lot in this course, from the IDE basics to debugging, profiling, AI, remote collaboration, and much, much more. Hopefully now you can see why Rider is such an incredible IDE and why I rave on about it so much. I've obviously not been able to cover every single aspect, setting, feature in Rider, but I've aimed to cover all of the big topics, and I've focused on what I think you should know to get the most out of Rider. So with that, I just want to say thank you for choosing this course, and feel totally free to reach out to me if you've got any questions or feedback. You should be able to find me very easily on most social media platforms, and all of my links are on danclark.com, including links to my podcast, YouTube channel, and newsletter. So until next time, happy coding.